Welcome to the PA Books Podcast. PA Books is a production of PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. This program features interviews with authors of books on Pennsylvania people, history, sports, business, nature, and politics. We hope you enjoy this podcast. This week on PA Books, Alison Feeney, author of For the Love of Beer, Pennsylvania's Breweries.
Alison Feeney, author of For the Love of Beer, Pennsylvania's Breweries. Was there some moment when you decided, I'm going to write a book about beer?
No, it is something that has come about over the last couple of years of doing some research, and it was one of those things where I did a bunch of academic papers, and then every time I would write it, other people would say, oh, this is great stuff. And so I thought the general public should know all the great things about Pennsylvania's beer history.
Now you have in the references in the back a couple of articles you wrote for academic journals. It sounds like beer trail maps and the growth of experiential tourism, cultural heritage, sustainable development, and the impact of craft breweries. How do you manage to tie an academic subject into something fun like beer?
Yeah, well, it is fun, that's true. The tourism mapping, my background is actually in mapping. That's where I do most of my teaching. And tourism for agro-tourism, and people are really trying to enjoy going to breweries and wineries and festivals. And if you look at all the tourism maps around, they sort of don't really do the justice for the brewing industry. So that's where that article comes from. In terms of our sustainable development, that really came about by visiting these breweries. When you visit breweries in some of these small towns, it's amazing the hard work and dedication that some of these brewers have put into really sort of redeveloping some of our small main streets, and then also revitalizing some of our large neighborhoods and large urban areas.
Do you feel like you're sort of getting away with something, going to breweries and festivals and all this and counting it as academic credentials?
No, actually it really is hard work. I've read a lot of academic papers along the way, and so there's a lot of research that goes into this. It's very timely. Agritourism, again, is a big input in a lot of not only geography, but sociology, anthropology. So that is a big sort of trend with our local food to farm type of table right now. And yeah, I certainly enjoy myself along the way, but yeah, it's pretty good.
So if somebody buys this book, what do they get?
Really a celebration of Pennsylvania, our amazing history, our cultural heritage, again, some of the architectural treasures that we have in the state, and then a lot of our local lores and legends that individuals, brewers are trying to promote about their hometowns. So it really is a book that kind of synthesizes a lot of the stories that the brewers are trying to tell and kind of putting it into context so that people can appreciate all Pennsylvania has to offer.
Well, you have a lot in here about the history of beer in general. Did you know much about that before you wrote the book?
I do actually have a history degree too, and so it is something that I have always enjoyed the history of. And the project actually came about when I was doing a student research project with a student of mine, and we were going through all the old wills and testaments of the earliest settlements here in Pennsylvania. And some of our earliest settlers had very little and certainly no monetary value, but the things that they would show up in wills were often the brewing equipment, and that equipment was passed down to women. And so it was really one of the main artifacts that was sort of historically passed down to women through, as sort of personal possessions. And so that I found really interesting, especially since today it's a very male-dominated field.
Well, you write here, what is often overlooked in history is the fact that until recently, women were the driving force behind much of the world's beer production. While men were out hunting and gathering, the women were in charge of brewing beer.
Yes, yeah, certainly there's a lot of archaeological evidence that suggests that, and certainly if you look at, the Epic of Gilgamesh, he talks about the beer maiden. There's a lot of songs about beer gods, and most of them were, or goddesses, were women. If you look at, and around the world really, you look at China, Egypt, Even in Chile, in South America, you have evidence that women were the ones that brewed the beer. It wasn't until it really becomes sort of an industrial type of product, and really sort of the monks kind of started that in Europe, really sort of making it into a science and recording the information and ingredients that would go into it. And they became very good at brewing beer, but they had a life of solitary, and not to collect wealth. But once they became very good at it, then the industry started around it and started to make money, and that's sort of where women then kind of get pushed out. But even in early North American settlement, a lot of the tavern owners and keepers were women. In Shippensburg, we have one of the oldest taverns, probably west of the Susquehanna, and it was a widowed woman who, came over. Her husband died on a boat, and she had a tavern, and it becomes actually the first courthouse west of the Susquehanna. And women had quite a role in beer making and North American history.
When you were doing your research for this book, did you come across women brewmasters today?
There's a few. It's minimal. It's improving slightly. Certainly, we have Zero Day in Harrisburg. She is an incredible woman and is actually taken charge and part of the Brewers of Pennsylvania. Free Will has 2 women brewers. Love City in Philadelphia has another. It's, when you can start naming individuals, it's a small number out there. I'm quite excited. Harrisburg, hopefully in the next year, we'll have the first African-American brewer. They are starting the Harris Family Brewing Company. And so, again, I think the industry is starting to diversify a little.
You also mentioned Carol Stout.
Yeah, she is one of the first, she's actually called the Queen of Hops. She was one of the first women brewers post-Prohibition, and they had the Stouts Brewery, and that is part of a larger complex, with a steakhouse, and now they have a bread and craft shop too that goes along with it. And yeah, she used her degree in biochemistry and was one of the first sort of in the state to really start brewing beer.
Now, you mentioned the Epic of Gilgamesh and ancient beers in Peru. What is it that beer that we drink today has in common with those beers that you can still call it all beer?
Probably. Hopefully today our beers are tasting better. I think it's probably. Now we have Patrick McGovern. He actually works in trying to recreate some of those recipes. And so if you really want to taste one, you certainly can. The actual ingredients are really sort of, is probably what makes it beer. Probably that malted barley is one of our first sort of harvested products that, throughout history humans started cultivating and harvesting to make beer. And again, if it was by accident or purpose, that part we may never know, but clearly it had some redeeming qualities and, enough that people would make it again and again. And, it obviously, it filled a niche. Again, we're talking about a time where there's no painkillers, medicines. People didn't understand contaminated water sources, and so it really was seen as a healthful option.
So if you had drunk one of those beers that was made in Peru, what would it have tasted like?
Good question. I haven't had one. I'm not really sure. It probably would taste fairly similar. You probably would have drank it out of straw. There wasn't sort of that same filtering process. It wasn't until much later that you really start getting hops involved. Hops become about 8th, 9th century. We start seeing hops appear, and that really is the flavoring as well as the preservative aspect of beer. And so, it would have definitely tasted different.
And if you had gone into a tavern in colonial Philadelphia or colonial Pittsburgh and ordered a beer, what would it have tasted like?
It probably would have been an ale or porter originally. Those were, again, we had a lot of British who brought that style of beer, which would have been darker and heavier and And they actually made what they called near beer too, because it wasn't just adults that drank beer. Women and children, all social status, drank beer. And so it was probably mostly ale, porters that they would have drunk. It's not until you get sort of the influx of Germans that really start sort of taking off. And the mid 1800s, you start getting lager yeast getting brought over, and that made a much cooler. You have to cool it to and drink it at a cooler temperature, and it's also clear. And so it came at a time when North America, obviously we have warmer summers, and so it was seen as more refreshing. And you also have the Glass Act patch, which means people actually started seeing their beer in glass rather than in sort of heavy tankards. And so it was a very, light, refreshing, nice-looking beverage that people enjoyed drinking, and it really took off. And that's part of the reason why Pennsylvania becomes the leader of beer production. For about nearly 100 years, we almost doubled every other state in the nation prior to Prohibition.
Was colonial beer carbonated?
Well, you probably would have had a little natural carbonation, but probably not the same amount that you'd have today.
They stored it in barrels?
Yes, yeah. So
because it seems like it would have gone flat if it was stored in a barrel.
Yeah. So again, your natural carbonation would give you, just a natural fermentation, you'd get a little bit, but yeah, it probably would not have been what we think of today as when we had the carbonation in.
What did you find as early history of beer in Pennsylvania?
In terms, what do you mean?
When did they start making beer in
start?
Pennsylvania?
As soon as they came. That was one of the very first buildings that most people started. As soon as they landed, they started brewing a beer, making a brewery. They brought beer on the ships with them when they came over from Europe, and it's often seen and recorded as sort of the reasons why the Mayflower stopped where they did, because they were running out of beer. A lot of the schools, the universities, as soon as they formed, would build a brewery. Again, the North America had plenty of fresh water, but the cultural tradition in Europe had been that water was seen as unhealthy. And so it was one of those things that they just saw as a natural sort of way to stay alive, was to have beer. So
you write in here, doctors often prescribe dark, rich porters for nursing mothers, the elderly, and those who were sick or frail. Commonly, people would start their day with a breakfast beer and continue drinking at work.
Yes.
How'd they ever get any work done?
Yeah, well, again, they did make a variety of different kinds of beers, lower alcohol, and what they called near beer too for children. But yeah, it was seen as a prescribed method of. My mother actually gave birth to my sister in England, and the doctor prescribed Guinness for her there to start breastfeeding. So, and my sister turned out pretty smart, so it must have worked.
When did it start becoming a product that people would package or you would buy somewhere other than at the alehouse?
Yeah, I believe cans become 1935, I believe, is when you first start seeing the first cans. And that really does transform society. So prior to that, you would have had sort of a male drinking by probably in a saloon, and when you start getting cans, you can actually start exporting it, bringing it to parties, to if you're going on a picnic, that kind of thing, and then you do start getting then bottled and mass-produced beer sort of from the last sort of 1930s, 1980s kind of thing is sort of the major beer production.
Well, in your book you talk a lot about the craft beers and the small breweries. When did that whole movement start?
Yeah, well, certainly craft beer today is just, sort of where a lot of people's interests are. But I do have to give a little credit to all that mass-produced beer. I do, I'm thrilled that the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl, and without people screaming dilly dilly, we wouldn't have that sort of excitement and the promotion and the advertisement around it. So, mass-produced beer has its place in our society. People still love Bud Light. I mean, there's no getting away from that.
So you're not one who's a snob and looks down on
Well, I
Bud
said
and
people
Miller?
still love it. So when it actually comes to what I'm going to drink, again, everything has its place. If you want different flavors, different qualities, a local beer that hasn't been sitting in a can for a long time, fresh beer, you need to go and get a craft beer. And Yeah, so that's where Pennsylvania, the laws changed. Jimmy Carter actually changed the laws in 1978. He made home brewing legal.
It wasn't legal
It
until
wasn't legal.
1978?
I know, which you think's kind of crazy, but if you think about distilling, right? I mean, distilleries, if you're going to home distill, it's moonshine, right? And it's illegal.
Still illegal.
Right,
Yeah.
still illegal. So, up until fairly recently, people were, whether they were secretly home brewing or not, but finally you could actually start talking about it and sharing ideas. And so you get this early movement starting around the 80s and really kind of brewing. We get, and then every state, that was at a national level, every state then had to pass individual laws too. And so you start seeing our first craft brews in Pennsylvania, sort of the early 90s. One or two of them started up and then didn't quite make it. And then, our great brewers that we have today, like Troe's, Weyerbacher, Lancaster, those breweries started, sort of 1994, 96 kind of era. And so they're now celebrating about 20 years of success, and they're really growing.
Where does Yuengling fit into that? I mean,
Yeah.
does that qualify as a craft beer or not?
It is based upon the size of production, and that's really sort of what craft beer is based upon, how many barrels are produced and outside ownership and, a few criteria along those lines. But yeah, we have two breweries in Pennsylvania that withstood Prohibition, and Yuengling is one of them. And, they proudly promote that on their label, saying the oldest beer in America. Straw beer is the other one. They're considered a legacy beer up in St. Mary's. And both are great. If you get a chance to go visit them, you get to really appreciate sort of the history. You go down in the tunnels of Yuengling, and you can see where they put up a brick wall during Prohibition, and and they've all had to adapt as well. They keep trying new things, and they're adapting from the past into the future as well with the craft beer industry.
There's a lot written about craft beers, and everyone gets excited about it, and there's books and all, but the mass-produced beers are still by far the largest marketing share. Why is it that the people still flock to the Budweisers and Millers and Coors?
I mean, their sales are declining slightly, but yeah, they still definitely have the market, and it's a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar industry, and they've become global conglomerates. I mean, it's amazing how successful those businesses have become. And if you think about it, they started from, very poor immigrants moving to this country, really just sort of hard work and building their businesses. And so those businesses are quite a testament to what, the beer industry can do. And I give them all the power. They're exploring too. They sent, grains up with, the spaceship with Elon Musk to, if they ever land on Mars, they want to be, brewing beer there. So, these large companies with a lot of money still have, political clout and can certainly change, and make inventions and do things just as they did in the past. But again, it's just the local businesses that really support sort of those local towns and the businesses. And generally, local businesses support other local businesses, so more of that money stays within the state than the larger companies where, again, it goes to sort of outside global companies.
Now, there was a time after Prohibition and before about the 1960s that every town had its own local brewery, and then there was consolidation. Why did that all happen?
Yeah, well, they had to compete with some of these larger companies. Yeah, a place like Pittsburgh, for example, went from having, I think there was about 30 that survived Prohibition, and they got down to 2 by sort of the 1950s. And they had to just compete, that mass market. Those companies that did survive Prohibition really became very clever in their marketing schemes. They actually started getting the entire market with refrigeration, transportation. They actually started buying refrigerated boxcars. And so they were able to offer things cheaper and, again, just sort of undercut the market there.
Now, what we also have with the mass breweries is that some of them are buying up some of the craft breweries. So if you want a craft beer, how can you tell whether you're not being fooled into buying something that's a Budweiser product?
Yeah, they certainly are buying, some of the the ones, especially that started up in the 80s, as they started to get bigger, that, Blue Moon, Goose Island, they started buying up some of those first craft breweries. And they don't really claim to, you don't see a Budweiser sticker on it or anything. So, they do try to sort of hide that. Really just sort of, that's what I love about the craft breweries, is you actually go there. Most of the time you actually meet the brewer, you can see the equipment, you can smell the hops, and that it's being made right there in a small batch item.
So if somebody wants to start up a brewery, what's involved in it?
A lot of work. A lot of work. These people work incredible hours. There's definitely a hard science behind it. I'm at Shippensburg University, and we're actually investigating possibly developing a fermentation science degree because there is that need to help people who want to learn how to brew. There are some online training courses. There are some training facilities outside the state or internationally. That's a lot of our brewers do actually travel to, like UC Davis. There's Chicago. There's Germany, where people have to go to learn brewing. Then we have another bunch of brewers who are just home brewers, and by trial and error and a lot of years of hard work, they kind of make their way and figure things out. So the one nice thing about the brewing industry is they're very collaborative. Brewers love to help each other. A lot of them make collaborative beers as sort of fun endeavors to be able to work together, but also as a learning process.
When you were doing the research for this book, you talked to a lot of brewers, a lot of people who started businesses. Did you figure out what is common thread among them that makes some of them successful?
Probably just their dedication and hard work. A lot of these brewers are very well educated. They've gone to school, they have advanced degrees, and for one reason or another, they just decided, whatever industry they had gone into was not for them, and they're quite passionate about what they do. And when you talk to some of them, I've seen some of them actually almost tear up and get quite emotional talking about that first year prior to opening, because they have no money. They're working like nonstop, and most of their work is going into developing their buildings. And so they are, they're putting when you go into a brewery, you see all the bar stools and the wood on the walls and the pitchers and everything that they've done, they've kind of built themselves. And when you talk to somebody, some of them are quite more excited to talk about their building than their actual beer. So that's how I know that they really do love what they're doing and willing to give up everything to kind of do that sort of work.
And then how do they decide what their product is going to be? So it's not just a cookie cutter of other beers, but it isn't so outlandish.
Yeah, well, it is a craft, and I think a lot of them like that creativity. Several of them will do sort of apprenticeships. Trogs is a great one. I always think I would love to see a family Trogs brewery kind of dispersion of people who go and train at and work at Trogs for a couple years and then go off and start their own brewery. And they're quite excited about going out and trying their own recipes. And so Collusion, for example, down in York is a great example. He went and trained in Germany. He's very knowledgeable about beer. He makes a different batch almost every time. He just loves that creativity. I think I was there when he made his 100th batch, and I think he said about 97 of them were all different. But that's really sort of the need for the education, that quality. Again, when you're trying something, these people do need to know what they're doing so that it comes out tasting good too, so it's not just an experiment. And that's, I think, where the science behind it, that a lot of them do have some sort of chemistry or biology type of background.
How much money does it take?
I think quite a lot. Quite a few go through crowdsourcing or try to get multiple partners. Even just the legal standpoint of getting up and running, Pennsylvania laws luckily keep improving, but we still have some things kind of hanging over from Prohibition, and opening a brewery and getting the licensing and all that is not easy. And so again, a lot of them do have to seek a lot of legal counsel. So it takes a lot of effort and a lot of money for some of these brewers.
So are there every now and then a state or federal inspector who shows up that everyone has to?
Yes, we do have a PLC, the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board, and they, yes, but especially before they open, they'll go in and improve, check, and yeah, they go through and check.
How many of the breweries have restaurants attached, and how many are just tasting rooms?
Almost all of them have some food, and again, I'm not positive on all the Pennsylvania laws because they sometimes change, but yeah, they do need to require to have some food offered if they are having a tasting room. So some of them will just have food trucks quite often to start with. Some of them will start off with just small items like pretzels. Some will allow you to bring other food in from, especially in neighborhoods where there's, some great restaurants nearby. And then often a lot of the breweries, as they kind of evolve, will start changing, like Molly Pitcher in Carlisle, for example. They had a small food source, and they just built a new brewery, and they have a full-size kitchen and have quite a great selection of food now, too, to go along with their beer.
Seems like they have some fun coming up with the names for their beers.
Yeah.
And the names for the breweries.
Right. Yeah, the beer names is really a great extension of the brewers, the owners, and the local legends. And that's what's really fun when you go in and you read a beer name and, you kind of learn about that sort of local history. And again, as I said, I have a history degree, and sometimes history can be a little dull. And so, being able to tell those local stories and the local legends, is a way of passing on that information. And again, we've become a society where we often don't storytell as much as, our ancestors did. And I think the breweries kind of do a nice job of keeping that tradition alive.
Can you think of any examples of fun names?
Fun, yeah. What can I say on TV? Some of them, a lot of them have all sorts of names. I'm trying to think. Most of them, again, sort of reflect the character of the place. Gear House, for example, in Chambersburg is all based upon the 6 owners love bicycling. And so the idea of a gear being a bicycle gear is throughout a lot of their beer names. And so you have things like Single Speed and, different. They have one called Pump Track, and they actually donate the proceeds towards actually a bicycle riding track in Chambersburg. And, so a lot of the beer names are pretty fun and really reflect something about that, the brewers and their desires to, again, sort of connect with the local people.
Another thing they can have fun with is the labels.
Yes. Yeah, that is one of the things I think as the industry kind of evolves, a lot of the brewers are starting to kind of recognize branding as an important aspect, especially as they do try so many different beers all the time. They need something along the line that gives connectivity to their product. Free Will, for example, has a tattoo artist make their beers, and they have a delightful, they can and they have quite colorful products out there. So, yeah, and then a lot of breweries will have, I always said I'd have a book just on chalkboards, and because, if you go in, partly it's because the menu's always changing, but they usually have a very colorful chalkboard with, designs and all sorts of things.
Now, if you have, you've started your brewery and put your money together and you have a product and you have a tasting room, how do you then get it distributed?
A lot of them actually just do not distribute, actually. A lot of our craft breweries at this stage are, you have to go there to, they don't actually package. And so now they do have growlers that you can take out to go. But yeah, most of them just sort of serve in their brew house. A couple of them will have a small bottling operation. But yeah, to get to this stage where you're canning takes another large investment. So that's why you find a lot of the breweries, the ones that are initially starting don't have those sort of money to actually,
So how do you get the local restaurants or local bars or local beer distributors or the grocery store to carry your beer?
Them? Yeah. Well, in terms of the restaurants, they would bring in kegs. And so certainly, you will get quite a few restaurants around the area carrying a local craft beer or two, and those would be brought in on kegs, fairly regularly. And yeah, when you get to actually the state distributing stores, you start to get to some of just our larger craft breweries, places like Trogs. A few, again, will have small bottling lines, so, a couple places you can pick up a bottle or two, but yeah, it's still a limited amount.
So someone is watching this and thinking, man, that's for me. I want to start a brewery. What are the big mistakes people like that make?
Well, the big mistake is they start home brewing and all their friends say, oh, this tastes great, because they're getting it for free. And then they think, oh, I can make a brewery. And that's probably the biggest thing, is you have a lot of friends when you're giving out free beer. When it actually comes to having to purchase beer, there's a lot involved in that. And again, that quality, the consistency, needs to be there.
So if you want to make beer, how do you start? What are the ingredients? What's the process?
Well, there's four main ingredients for beer. It's barley and hops are the two common ones. And again, my book, it's not really a surprise that I start, the beginning part of the chapter has a local hop farm. We are starting to get some local hops in the state. But if not, you can get dried pelletized hops as well from either Germany or from Washington or Oregon. And we actually have started to get a few malters in the state as well. We had, just in the last couple of years, again, after Prohibition, we really didn't have any malters either. So you can get some local malt and local hops for your beer. Other than that, it takes a lot of water, which again is probably local, and then you have yeast. And those are really the four main ingredients in beer. After that, if you start putting in pumpkin and different spices and things, that's, sort of the flavoring after the fact.
Can hops grow here and barley grow here as well as it grows anywhere else, or is there like a Napa Valley of hops?
Yeah, well, we used to have wild hops grow in Pennsylvania, and then right around the time of Prohibition, you also got some fungus and some environmental diseases kind of wiped out the natural hop population. And really, for about 70, 80 years, we didn't grow any hops in the state. And it's really just starting to come back. You'll get a lot of home brewers growing, a few stalks in their yard. But yeah, we have, probably about less than a dozen hop farmers in the state, and they've got maybe 2-3 acres at the most kind of hops out there. So we're really just starting to get a feel for what can grow again and what does well in this climate. And, hopefully I know Pennsylvania Department of Ag is really trying to promote that diversification of agriculture and trying to help those farmers out.
Is there any locally grown yeast?
Yeah, that's actually, so a lot of people do, you can purchase a variety of yeast if you're a home brewer, or again, different places will have specific yeast that they use over and over again. But one of the sort of the trends in the brewing industry right now are these wild and sour beers, and that is where people are growing their own yeast, and yeast does kind of take on the natural, again, that terroir. So, people will, at the end of that book, I have a PA preferred beer where they use local hops, local malt, local water, and a home brewer actually grew the yeast in his windowsills for the beer. And so all 4 parts of the beer were completely made in Pennsylvania. So yeah, some of our breweries, Roy Pitts, for example, they just celebrated 10 years in Chambersburg, but they now opened up a new location in Philadelphia, and that brewer is excellent at, the science behind the bacteria for wild and sour beers. And we have a new one opening up in Camp Hill that's supposed in the next week that's supposed to be dedicated often to a lot of sour beers too. So.
What does it look like when you're growing yeast? What does it grow in? What does it look
I know,
like?
I do it by accident in my fridge when I leave bread too long. But yeah, no, I am definitely not the expert in growing yeast. Yeah, on purpose. So yeah, but they do, they have a lab. They grow a couple of these breweries are starting that scientific process. They have microscopes and they are, analyzing their yeast and growing them and really sort of taking the science of that to the next level, so that we can get the wild beers. I love them, but they all, they're a little different. They're not for everybody. They definitely have a little of a sour pungent to them. So,
How many breweries did you visit to write this book?
well, I used to pride myself that I had been to all of them in the state, but they are now. We had more open last year than the last 3 years combined, and even since March, we passed over 317 breweries, which was the number we had probably prior to Prohibition, so to Harmonic. We now have about 360 in the state, and so yeah, they're opening up faster than I can get to all of them. So, but yeah, probably a good 250 to 300.
How often do they close?
Very rarely. They rarely have one, every now and then one will close, and it's usually not for lack of, a business sense. It's really, maybe somebody wants to retire or, just circumstances with the actual location. And then if they do close, chances are those brewers have gone off to open up another brewery somewhere else. Most of them are very successful, actually. I mean, they are growing slowly, but a lot of the locations have now, have a second or third location, or they're selling at a marketplace. Chatty Monks, for example, they have a great location in Reading, in downtown Reading, and they opened up a second location. And then, yeah, I hear they're now at a farmer's market, on certain days too. And that's sort of characteristic of a lot of breweries around the state. They all are kind of, expanding or adding a second location.
Does that make them a little less crafty if you have one like Sly Fox where they have a half dozen locations?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's certainly still like Sly Fox still has, well, that brewer actually just left, and I heard he's taking over the old Yards building, because Yards now moved into a new facility in Philadelphia, which is an incredible facility and really takes into sort of the growth and sustainability and the industry has. So yeah, so you do have some of these brewers moving on to other places, but most of them again are maintaining that same quality. Again, you have again, a lot of them will still brew in the same location, but just having more access to the public.
So you said you visited 250 to 300 breweries to write this book. Let's take a road trip around the state in your mind. I'm going to challenge you. And say you start, we're recording this in Camp Hill at our studio, and say you start here and you're going to take a trip all around the state. Tell me where you stop.
Yeah, it's, if you start here in Camp Hill, you don't have to go very far to probably hit 60 breweries within, 60 miles. I mean, really, if you go down that 81 corridor to 283, 83, the Lancaster, to Hershey, to, that surrounding area, you'd get quite a few breweries in that direction. Certainly, if you go towards Philadelphia.
Oh, name some names, though.
Okay. Oh, all right.
Some of your favorites.
Yeah. Oh, well, favorite.
If people want to take this road trip, recommend places for them.
Again, I have favorites that are based on a variety of different reasons. I mean, certainly, if you want the quality of beer, I mean, you can't miss Trogs. Trogs is now the top 30 producing beer, in the nation, and their quality is up there, and they just make it an incredible tourist experience. Everything they do, they provide information. So if you want to learn about beer, that's a great place. Again, Weyerbacher is another place that's just, they do a great tour. It's very informative. I actually took, my kids with me, and they were taking a history class on drinks around the world, and they were like, wow, we learned a lot from that. So, it's informative as well as very interesting. And Weyerbacher is one of those early beers that really got into what we call big beer, the heavier alcohol or the higher alcohol content. And they do all sorts of, unique, we were talking about breakfast beers. They have something called the oatmeal breakfast stout, which would probably put me out for the rest of the day, but it's pretty good.
Okay, head west.
One of my top favorites for several reasons as you head west is in Braddock. It started by two young guys who actually started brewing while they were in college. And they make incredible beer. They've won national awards in blind taste tests against some of the top breweries in the country. But the reason I really love it is, Braddock has a pretty tough history. It was a town that really has survived a variety of different events over the last couple hundred years, or barely survived. And they have a thriving business. They send out an email every week, so unfortunately I don't get there as often as I would like, but I read their emails, and they have to put up release schedules because they get such long lines with people wanting their beer. So people are willing to travel and wait in line for these beers in Braddock. And I mean, if that's not a successful sort of business plan for, again, sort of young guys to really help and revitalize this town. Yeah.
Are the beers really that good, or is it kind of image?
They are pretty good. Again, they have won a lot of awards nationally. So yeah, they do have good beer. They're very bright individuals, and they really sort of have focused on sort of that quality and learning about different beers. But certainly, I mean, their tap room is just a great experience. They have different. It's a very clean looking place, more of sort of an urban chic, very simplistic look compared to some of the other breweries, which are more older and sort of got that rustic feeling to them. So it is kind of a different look, but yeah, that's definitely sort of one of my favorites as I head west. And then certainly if you get towards Pittsburgh, like that Lawrenceville area, within a mile, you can go from ones that like Church Brew Works, which is built in a historic church, is just a great sight to see. But some of the newer ones, like 11th Hour, they have clocks. It's just a fun place to be able to walk down. Within 1 or 2 miles, again, you can hit probably 5 or 6 breweries that all have slightly different characteristics.
Is Iron City gone now?
Good question. Well, not really. I mean, they're still brewing. I have been to that, they have a pretty large plant, but the actual the brewery, the large facility, they have that. There is a posted on the thing saying that they do actually hope to kind of brew, and, what the status of that is, I'm not positive.
We skipped past a couple of towns between here and Pittsburgh. Yeah. There's Johnstown, Altoona, Bedford, Somerset. You mentioned Chambersburg.
Yeah, so Bedford, for a while there was kind of a gap in that center part of the state, but they are starting to fill in. Bedford Brewing Company now has one. There's one called Coal Country. Levity Brewing, I was at IUP. IUP actually has Levity and another one about a mile apart from each other. And again, those Levity's again another one of my favorites. They renovated. They're another one that spent a good year renovating a vacant building and put a lot of hard work into it, and host a lot of local events and musicians, and really support that local community.
When you make beer, how long is it from the time you first start boiling the water till when you can serve it?
So usually about 30 days, a couple weeks usually. So, but again, the ones that, depending on the style of beer, whether, it's top fermenting or bottom fermenting, and then also the flavors that they're trying to put into it. And certainly, again, the new ones where they're barrel aging or sours, those ones they can actually store for 2 to 3 years, and, to really get the flavors that they want.
What's the difference between top fermenting and bottom fermenting?
The type of yeast and when and how it actually ferments. One's at the top, one's at the bottom. And so one takes, more cooler temperatures and produces a lager beer versus, ones that produce more like the ales and the stouts.
Does it actually ferment at the top of the vat or versus the bottom of the vat?
So, that's the name. So.
Well, let's continue our trip.
Okay.
City of Pittsburgh?
Again, the Lawrenceville neighborhood is pretty fun to get around. And then certainly as you get, if you travel north from there, you get like North Country Brewing. Certainly Erie has some great breweries. They have a whole collection up near Erie Brewing Company. Certainly is one of the larger ones. They too also have a great tourist attraction similar to Trogs, where you can walk through and sort of visually see all the products being made and learn about it as you go through the beer.
Meadville has one that's getting some notoriety.
Meadville. Which one's in
I forget the name of it.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's move on. Across the northern tier, where it is sparsely populated, where do
right.
you stop
There's
for a
still lots. That whole Route 6 is actually trying to design a tourism sort of trail for beer, because there's enough of them out along there. There's a neat one in called Nob Hill, which is attached sort of to a winery, but they have a tasting right along sort of the road, and you can learn about how it's made, and they have both beer and wine there. Or some others. It's now called Ironheart. That's one of the breweries where we said, rarely does one close. There was one called Three Guys and a Beard, and that was in Carbondale. And that they sort of restructured, and so one of the owners is now runs it as Ironheart in Carbondale. And again, that's another great example of, a town that really kind of is in decline, and from past industries, and you go into this town and you have a little brewery and you have all these people in there sitting around chatting, and it's quite nice.
Yes, one section of your book, how microbrews have helped with urban or small town revitalization.
Yeah. Rusty Rails is one of the examples I think is great. That's sort of north central, but it is in a small town. I think there's like 300 people, and yet you have this incredible brewery. So it's really a destination brewery for people to go to. There's a rail trail along it, which used to be the railroad, hence the name Rusty Rails. And it was an old factory, and so it's a beautiful building, and it's like 2 stories. You look down into the 3rd story, which is the basement of where the brewing tanks are. That has incredible food, and it's really a nice patio. So again, if you've been along the rail trail, you can relax afterwards and enjoy the food and drink afterwards.
You also write about the buildings and some of the unique buildings. You mentioned one is in a church. What are some other kind of quirky adaptations?
The church, Battlefield Brewworks in Gettysburg, is in a Confederate field hospital, which is, again, just a beautiful building. Sealings Grove, I think, is really noteworthy. He was the first governor west of the Susquehanna River, and it's in Simon Snyder's mansion, and it's in the basement there. And he was one of the first governors across the whole nation to speak out about slavery. He's also Pennsylvania's only 3rd term governor, and so he's a really important person. And we have a brewery in his mansion.
Let's see. We have gone around the corner to Scranton, Wilkes-Barre.
Scranton has a great one called Breakers. Brewing, and it is all designed. It's in an old schoolhouse, and it takes in a lot of the history of the anthracite coals that was from the area, and so you see a lot of the pictures of coal miners, and then they have a lot of their beer names reference like anthracite coal or the coal fire, and there's different, food items that all kind of reflect different parts of the coal industry.
Lehigh Valley?
Lehigh Valley, I would have to say, well, there's a couple interesting ones there. They actually have a group of brewers that work together and try to sort of collaborate, so it's hard to pick out 1 or 2 in that area. Certainly Bond Place Brewing. That is a small brewery right downtown Lehigh. They are very creative, and they sort of epitomize craft craft brew, if you want to go in and learn about beer, they are always there working. They are very gregarious and would love to talk to people. And they always put little videos up on Facebook and Instagram and stuff. So it's easy to to learn from them, as well as see some of their quirky behaviors. But they've won some awards at the Great American Beer Festival too, and really put some good stuff out. Also in that area, you have Fagley's, which has 2 locations, Allentown and Bethlehem. They were one of the first to adopt solar and wind power and some of the sustainability efforts of the state. Hidden River is another one that's in it's on the property originally owned by William Penn, and is just in a beautiful old house, in a really neat location.
How often do you come across a beer that's new, that you like?
About 5 o'clock? No. Yeah. Quite often. I mean, I do, my actual preferences change based upon the season and what I'm doing and things. But these people really do have done some creative things. And again, not everything is for me. I've, had some flavors that I'm not necessarily thrilled with, but I still appreciate the quality and craftsmanship that they've put into that. So, so even if it's a beer flavor, and that's what's great about a lot of these breweries, you can try samplers. And, the brewers or the bartenders are usually really, they want to please their customers. And so if people says, I don't really like beer, or I don't like dark beer, they like to hear that, and they want to know, and they were willing, they'll give little samples out and try to make suggestions to actually, pick something that people do like.
Do you have favorite styles and styles that you don't like?
Yeah, again, it changes. Like in the wintertime, after skiing or something, like a porter or a stout is just, that's great. I mean, that's a meal for me. So in the summers, I like more of the refreshing. I love the sour beers that are out. I find that, they're cooler. I really enjoy those. The craft beer with the IPAs are just classic, trying to get the more hoppier flavor. But they do tend to be a bit more bitter, so they're not everybody's preference, or again, and also a lot of these beers pair well with different foods. So, depending on what you're doing, what you're eating, they taste quite different.
When you say a Belgian style beer, that means something, or a German style beer, that means something. Is there a Pennsylvania style beer, or a kind of a regional thing that you might not find other places?
Good question. We've had an IPA for a while, and we are starting to get, a North American IPA. And so, because there is enough of a difference from some of those global kind of companies. No, I would put Pennsylvania beers up against most of the nation. We do outproduce California. We took over as the largest producing state in the nation. And, when people think of craft beer movement, they often think of the Pacific Northwest. But Pennsylvania is actually overtaken that. And, I think a lot of our brewers can, nationally stand up to anything that Denver or Seattle can put out. So actually the town, that was another place to go. Phoenixville actually has more breweries per 5 mile area than it ranks in the top 10 of per breweries per square mile in the country. It's interesting. They did go through a revitalization, and the town put some money into putting in a rail trail and a historical center and things like that. And you had a few like Sly Fox, Iron Hill, put in, as major anchors. And then in the meantime, just these other breweries, Stable 12 is another brewery that is really fun to visit. It's at one end of the town, and once you start walking, and those are just breweries. There's wineries and other distilleries along that 1 mile stretch of road there in Phoenixville. And, if it's the that suburban Philadelphia population, you definitely have a higher number of people with higher incomes and, typically sort of that younger population that really sort of thrives or, lends itself to the craft brewing industry.
We haven't gotten to Philadelphia yet. If you're in Center City, Philadelphia, what do you
Center
find?
City, Second Story is kind of cool. It's right down in Old Town, so you walk down the cobbled streets, and it's a cool old bar right down there. So certainly Yards, if you're in Philadelphia, is a must. It's again they've recently moved to their new location, and it's just packed. I mean, it's an incredible facility, and really draws in a lot of people. As I mentioned, the Roy Pitts now has their Barrel House, which is the cider or the sour location, and Love City is right there. And then it's also, I think, expanding into, we're starting to get cideries as well. We have, right in that same neighborhood, you have Current Cider, which is starting up to have bars as well. So I think the whole industry as a whole, really kind of is developing.
Is a shakeout inevitable where eventually we have fewer breweries and stronger ones, or can the market absorb more, just keep on absorbing more
People keep
breweries?
asking, they're like, don't we have enough? But really, they keep expanding. So yeah, eventually it'll be interesting when we kind of max out. But the idea of these breweries is that they're local. And so, people like that local aspect. They want to go, I mean, it does taste better when it's fresh, so being able to, get a fresh beer, at your local brewery, I think is something that people like. Again, we live in a society where we're all on our phones and our computers all day long, and I think people really do like that opportunity to socialize and, talk to somebody. And so, yeah, I mean, at some point we can't have that many breweries, but this still seems to be increasing, so.
In England, every little town has its own pub that makes its own beer there. Are we heading toward that? I mean, have bars figured out just how easy it is to make beer and add on their local made?
Yeah, well, that's I mean, certainly there are certainly restaurants that have gone for brewing licenses, and so that they can add beer that they made there on site. And yeah, certainly if you do travel to Europe, you do have that local aspect, and people go, and again, I think we might be moving towards that. I mean, clearly we'll never be sort of the same density or location of Europe where you have, sort of these small villages. We still like our cars and drive across the state and on a turnpike. But I mean, certainly people do like that local aspect and be able to go to their local brewery.
So now that this book is finished, the market keeps changing all the time. Will you have to update it periodically and come up with a second and third edition?
Yeah, so when I wrote the book, I was making sure that it wasn't an inventory of every brewery in the state. That's not the purpose of it. Because one, it is growing so fast that it would be updated before it was published. It's really more the themes that go along with it. I certainly could do. Again, we have enough more breweries now to add in more. I think some of the trends that come along will be some of the local restaurants, the food, the farm-to-table kind of movement that's going along with it. Evergreen here in Camp Hill has a restaurant attached called The Little Bird, where he gets all of his locally sourced ingredients, and he actually put hops in his food. He makes hop sausages. He puts hops on his his pizza. And so it's I think that the market will keep expanding that way.
We've been speaking with Alison Feeney. She is the author of this book, For the Love of Beer, Pennsylvania's Breweries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to a podcast of PA Books, a production of PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. Full episodes of PA Books, as well as other PCN programs, are available to stream with the PCN app. Visit PCNTV.com or the App Store for details. Like us on Facebook.